All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective, and that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So, how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure-to-pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity, but to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy, or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
We always go into these things with a hypothesis, and I'm kind of expecting it's going to show up. I did not expect for discipline to outpace compensation as the number one issue affecting teachers. If I would have bet on that, I would have lost.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
All right, everyone. My guest today is Debbie Veney. Debbie is the Senior Vice President of Communications and Marketing at the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. Previously, Debbie led public policy and communications at the New Schools Venture Fund. She also managed government affairs and communications at the Education Trust and has held senior communications positions at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Communities in Schools. Debbie serves on the boards of the Education Writers Association as well as the DC Jazz Festival. She has a bachelor's degree in journalism from Howard University and a master's in mass communication from Temple University. In today's episode, Debbie and I break down the top 5 takeaways for charter school administrators based on a national teacher survey conducted by the National Alliance called Listen to Your Teacher, an analysis of teacher sentiment on the state of public education. Hope you enjoy the episode. All right, Debbie. So we're going to be talking about a report recently published by the National Alliance called Listen to Your Teacher, an analysis of teacher sentiment on the state of public education. And before we dive into the data, the findings, I would love to know, why this survey? What was the impetus for collecting this data?
I enjoy doing research that is relevant and timely and kind of the moment. And so the thing that everybody is talking about right now is teacher shortages, teacher satisfaction or lack thereof, teacher retention, teacher recruitment strategies. This is all a huge, huge deal. And so it impacts all schools across all sectors. And I thought it would be really fun to hear directly from teachers to get a better understanding about the motivations behind the numbers that we're seeing, and then also to understand if there are any differences between the different types of public schools, charter schools, and district schools.
And you mentioned the numbers that we're seeing and kind of this national teacher retention, teacher sentiment issue. And so I actually want to read, if it's okay with you, I want to read a quick segment from the introduction of the report. So okay. It reads, according to data from 15 states collected and analyzed by Chalkbeat, every state showed an increase in teachers exiting the classroom compared to the year before the pandemic. In Colorado, Louisiana, Maryland, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Washington, more teachers left in 2021 and 2022 than at any point on record. And a recent Brown University study found that in terms of prestige, job satisfaction, and many other factors, the state of the teaching profession is at or near its lowest levels in 50 years. That is a pretty daunting paragraph and doesn't paint a beautiful picture. And so are those the numbers you're referring to? Is that the type of data that sort of led you all to think, man, we really need to pick up the rock and look underneath it? That's
exactly the data I'm talking about. And it is daunting. And I think it almost feels like overwhelming to hear numbers like that. And I think whenever you're in this place of grappling with really not great data or news, the challenge is to not get stuck there, but to figure out, well, what can we learn from it and how do we get out of this really, really bad place?
And one of the things that makes this report unique is you mentioned, as you all were thinking about doing this survey, not only did you want to understand what was the national teacher sentiment, but the follow-up question was, is there a difference here between teachers in charter schools and teachers in our traditional public districts, or what we think of as traditional public districts? And so, I asked you ahead of this podcast to come up with 5 key takeaways for administrators that this report speaks to in terms of hearing from their teachers or understanding teacher sentiment. But before we get into that, I'm kind of curious to dig into that latter point, which is when you looked at traditional, public teachers versus charter teachers, what were some of the things that maybe made charter school teachers unique? Was it ubiquitous, or did you all find things that spoke to a difference between those two categories?
There were a lot of things that were absolutely almost identical across both types of teachers. So things like wanting to have their voices heard, wanting to feel valued, wanting to feel respected as professionals, feeling like they're overwhelmed. I think that was like the number one thing that was pretty consistent across all teachers we talked to. Also feeling like they just need more support and people understand how hard it is to be teachers. So all those things were pretty consistent. But then we saw some really interesting differences between the charter school teacher experience and the district school teacher experience. And a lot of it had to do with job satisfaction. It is significantly higher for charter schools than it is for their district counterparts. But the most fascinating stat for me was about motivation. So teaching is hard. Nobody would ever say like, this is a cakewalk type of thing that you just phone in. Like teaching is it's really hard. And I think with most hard things, you come into it enthusiastic, got a lot of gusto. I'm going to make the best of this thing. You get tired over time. It kind of wears you out. And we definitely saw that with teachers. It kind of wore them out over a period of time. But with charter teachers, interestingly enough, the motivation to stay in the classroom actually increased over time. So like 80% of charter school teachers were as or more motivated to stay in the profession than when they started. And just in case you're curious about what that looks like on the other side, it's only about 30% of district school teachers who say that they were as or more motivated to stay in the classroom as when they started.
I was shocked by that stat when I read it. And this is, I don't want to speak bad about my personal high school experience, but certainly, you did notice as a student that, I went to a public high school, shout out to Hillsborough County in Florida, awesome spot. And you did notice that teachers who had been in the classroom for 20, 30 years, that maybe some of that motivation or gusto was no longer there. And you get it because it's a hard job and they're doing it for a long time. And so it's pretty amazing that 80% of teachers actually feel more motivated in the charter space. And hopefully that's encouraging to charter school leaders. Was that particular stat one of the biggest discrepancies? Like as you were looking at the comparison throughout the various data points you collected?
Oh, absolutely. Like literally when we looked at the data, there was this inverse proportionality. So almost to exactly the same percentage points. So something in the range of 60% of district school teachers felt less motivated over time, and something like 60% of charter school teachers felt more motivated over time. And then another 20% were as or more on the district side. Another 20% were as or less on the charter side. So it was literally like, they start out here and they go in two completely different directions.
Okay, so clearly the encouragement, I know I read the doom and gloom statistic paragraph to kick us off here, but the encouragement is clearly charter schools are doing something right, but that doesn't take away from a lot of the things you mentioned, which were the same sort of ubiquitously. Teachers want to have their voice heard. Teachers want to know that they're supported. Teachers want to be safe in the classroom. And so what I'd like to do is really dig into kind of the top 5 takeaways for administrators who maybe haven't read this report, but are listening to this. And obviously we're going to encourage you to go check out the report and read it, and we'll link to it and all of that. But let's talk through some of the kind of high-level learnings. I asked you to come up with 5. Let's kick things off with your first one. Do you want to take it, or do you want me to read it and then we can talk through why you chose it?
Why don't you read it and we'll talk through it.
Perfect. Okay, so number 1, you had student behavior and discipline issues outrank pay as the biggest challenge teachers currently face. The percentage difference was 76% versus 67%, the former being discipline issues, the latter being pay.
So that blew my socks off. I hear a lot, and let me say it's, I think, a fair criticism. So I hear a lot about how horrible the compensation is for teachers. And, there was certainly over the past like 5 to 10 years, it's been an even bigger deal with teachers, even in red states that are not unionized, like walking out and really getting more vocal about the not awesome compensation and benefits that they have. So I expected that to be number one. Even though the research will often surprise us, we always go into these things with a hypothesis, and I'm kind of expecting it's going to show up. I did not expect for discipline to outpace compensation as the number one issue affecting teachers. If I would have bet on that, I would have lost.
Yeah, me too. I'm with you on that. I absolutely would have bet on pay. It seems to be the number one issue anytime you have a conversation about teacher retention. One of the things that was shocking to me was I'll read this from the report. It said about 17% of a teacher's workday is spent supporting students' mental or physical well-being. And then there's an additional 23% spent on classroom management issues. So that could just be dealing with students, while you're trying to teach a lesson. And that's a total of 40% of your time spent on non-instructional activities. That's a pretty shocking stat, and maybe lends to why this is currently outranking pay as the biggest issue. Do you feel like, and maybe some of this came up as you all were doing the survey, do you feel like this is directly tied to some of the challenges that the pandemic created? Or do you feel like this has been a growing issue that schools have needed to address and got maybe exacerbated by some of the challenges of the pandemic?
Oh, I think it's been going on a long time. And I do think that the pandemic shone a spotlight on it, as it did with a lot of things having to do with learning challenges and other sorts of things. So I really feel like it made us more focused and aware of it, and it exacerbated it to some extent. You've got a bunch of kids who are starting second grade and never went to kindergarten or first because of the pandemic. And so some of the socialization that you would expect a kid to have mastered by the time they're in second grade we all kind of line up and we go to the water fountain, and everybody sits at their little table, and we open our books this way, and we put our backpacks on the nook. They have not been in a nook. They have not, been sitting in classrooms around cute little tables together. And so I think that has brought a different set of challenges, as we've had older kids who have just not been brought up in the system in the same kind of way and used to the cooperative play that happens when you're in school and you have to share resources and wait for the other person's turn to talk. So I do think that's real. And I think it's always been a problem.
Got it. So if this is our first takeaway for administrators, what's the tactical action step needed? Or what would you encourage administrators or charter school leaders to think about based on this discipline issue versus pay statistic breakdown?
I would encourage administrators to provide specific supports and resources for teachers with this. It's often not something that they're learning in their teacher prep programs. And also we have to, I think, find a balance between wanting to provide a great education for every kid, no matter how they're showing up in the classroom, and then also providing a safe environment in the classroom that's conducive for learning and for the safety of the other students and for the teacher. And so that may mean we have to really look at how we do more intensive supports for students who need that. And, there's different ways of thinking about this. Some people that'll say, oh, well, you just, you can't remove them from the classroom. I'm not saying remove them from the classroom in the way that they don't get instruction. I'm saying, what do we do that acknowledges that this kid has a specifically significant set of issues, and how do we embrace them and give them the supports that they need?
Yep.
Teachers are crying out for that.
Really good tactical advice. Okay, let's move on to number 2. 80% of charter school teachers are more motivated to teach when they began teaching, compared to only 34% of district teachers. This is the statistic that you quoted at the beginning when you were talking about kind of the major difference between our traditional district teachers and our charter teachers. Like, based on this, what's the takeaway for administrators? Is it kind of continue to do what we're doing, or are there particular things that you all have observed that charter schools are doing that have led to this more positive statistic?
Teachers get into the profession because they want to make a difference. They are motivated kind of almost like firefighters or like other like police officers, people who serve the public. They're different. They're not like the rest of us. The rest of us see a fire and run the other way. We see like a crime happening and we take off like away from it. And teachers are on the front line and they love this. So they're motivated by something that's different than the rest of us. And for a person like that, who really wants to feel like they're making a difference, when they get mired in bureaucracy, when they keep getting told what they cannot do, when they don't have adequate resources for their students, that is demotivating. And these are people, you don't need to do anything to motivate them. They're kind of already motivated, but you can demotivate them by putting them in environments that don't allow them to be able to make the kind of impact that they really desire. And I would say the lesson to administrators here is really remember that these are special employees who need to feel that they're making an impact every day. And where there is space to not make it overly bureaucratic, can you let teachers have more control over what happens in their classrooms? Can we listen to them more? Can we create spaces for them to try some different things? I think that will make a lot of difference in terms of motivation. And those are the types of things that routinely happen within a charter school and in the charter classrooms.
Today's episode is brought to you by CDW Education. CDW is a trusted technology partner to more than 15,000 K-12 schools, having deployed over 3 million Chromebooks into the classroom, with over 1,000 schools participating in their North American Google Technical Collaborative. Did you know that CDW Education's digital edtech team, a special team dedicated to serving the charter community, advises charter school leaders like yourself as you evaluate technology solutions and the positive impact they can have on the student and staff experience, as well as academic achievement? To learn more about the technology solutions CDW Education recommends, whether you're modernizing your classroom, protecting student data, improving internet connectivity, or even building an esports program from the ground up, you can email digitaledtech, that's all one word, digitaledtech, at cdw.com, and an edtech advisor from their team will follow up with you. All right, now back to the show. That really is a good segue to number 3, as you're talking about how do we not make the school environment overly bureaucratic? How do we not basically quash motivation, if you will, or innovation? And this third stat is 91% of public school teachers report feeling caught in a culture war crossfire. And this was, I believe this was 91%. That's across charter and district. That's
board.
Across the whole 1,200
Yep.
teachers surveyed. 91%. That's basically everyone.
That's
Feels like they're
high, right?
It's crazy high. Everyone feels like they're caught in a culture war. How should we react to this stat? What's your encouragement to the community, to administrators, as you look at that type of a response from teachers?
I think the biggest thing that struck me there is because it's such a pervasive sentiment, you can't ascribe it to one type of community or one racial group or, one geographic area. It literally is everybody. And I think sometimes people who are not in the classroom, they have really good ideas and good intentions and they mean well. And they voice these things upon teachers and upon classrooms because they think that teachers are looking for that or that it's going to help them do their jobs. And that's just not the case. The data is showing us that actually is the opposite. And teachers would like you to stop that politics, please, at the door. And they are a politically astute group. So they vote in super high numbers. They care a lot about government and politics, but they don't want that to interfere with doing their job of teaching. And they really wish that people would just knock it off with that and let us get back to how it used to be when kids came to learn, teachers came to teach, and parents and also the community trusted teachers to have their students' best interests in mind. And there wasn't this hyper politicization happening outside of the classroom that's then being put on teachers.
Yeah, almost being weaponized against the teachers.
Perfect word. Exactly.
Yeah. And what was fascinating too, I want to make sure that I'm quoting this correctly. I think in this section in the report, you all also looked at political affiliation, and it was like 50-50. It was like, it was almost perfectly 50-50, Democratic and Republican. And I think that is also an important stat not to lose sight of, because to your point, depending on what city you're in or what part of the country you're in, you could talk to someone who says, well, all of our teachers vote this way, or all of our teachers vote this way. Or everyone thinks just like I do about this issue, when the data is showing the complete opposite. It's, hey, if you're an administrator, you might personally be really passionate about this political issue, but half of your organization might think the complete opposite of that. And so instead of trying to take, what is a political issue and turning it into an issue in the classroom, how can you remove that pressure on teachers and allow them, like you said, to kind of, be themselves in the classroom, but not bring politics into the classroom in a way that causes that tension between parents in the school or administrators and the teachers or teachers and other teachers. And so I found that really interesting that teachers sort of all agree, let's keep politics out of it. And we're a diverse group that thinks, we all have different political opinions.
Yeah, that blew my socks off, because this is another time where I came in with the hypothesis and the data proved something else. So I imagined that within certain communities, if people kind of all felt a similar way, then they might be aligned around a particular political agenda. And, that community would, of course, include teachers. And I'm not saying that teachers are not political animals, but it does stop at the schoolhouse door, the classroom door.
All right, so let's move on to takeaway number 4. So this next statistic is support for public school choice is high among all public school teachers, regardless of the type of public school where they teach. And the follow-up stat to this is many of those teachers have taught in both types of schools, so taught in a traditional district school as well as a charter school, and 4 in 5 teachers agree that school choice is important for families and teachers, again, going back to our last question, regardless of political affiliation. And school choice often gets thrown into the bucket of a political war or a divisive political issue. So this was really fascinating. And when you look at a stat like this, obviously working for the National Alliance and being very pro school choice, was this one of those stats that you were surprised by? What do you think the takeaway is here? Does this have implications maybe for how charter schools think about recruiting teachers? Is there opportunities for administrators to be more open to teachers from all sorts of teaching backgrounds, not just recruiting one charter school to the next? Talk us through your reaction to this.
So this was very encouraging to me. And people in general are not ideologically rigid around this issue. People in general want great things for kids, and they just inherently understand that it probably makes sense that parents should have say choice in the type of school that their kids attend. And so it's not crazy talk. We're not oceans apart on this issue. And newsflash, teachers are also people. They're people who live in the community. And so they're not going to be this sect kind of off to themselves that have a set of beliefs and ideas that are not reflective of what the larger community feels. And I think it's important to understand that they are people who could work in all different types of settings. They have kids. A lot of them and their children may attend different types of schools in different settings. They have family members. And so I would encourage people to keep an open mind and don't presume that just because a teacher comes from this particular background or that one, that's the only place you can recruit from. I think, remember that teachers more than anything want to make a difference. And so there could be a lot of opportunities, I think, for some teachers who might be right on the edge of losing their motivation, and they could get a whole second wind in a different type of teaching and learning environment, such as at a charter school. Also, they might even be interested in leadership roles within the charter sector. So I think this should be encouraging to all of us. We should see that there's a really wide pool of folks who want to make a difference and fundamentally believe in many of the same things that we value.
Fantastic. All right. So last, but certainly not least, number 5 takeaway, teachers need overall support in addition to better pay and benefits, better safety in the classroom, support from administrators, having more autonomy, having a voice. All of those things are going to help our teachers stay in the classroom. And, there was a whole litany of stats that I won't read them all from the report, you have to go read the report yourself to get all the fun stats, but everything from 1 in 2 teachers asking for better access to counseling for themselves, less than 40% having supports or opportunities to get involved in their community. There's kind of this laundry list of statistics of teachers looking for additional support. And where would you recommend administrators start? Because I think it's easy to say, if we better supported our teachers, we wouldn't have this big teacher retention issue. And so at the macro level, it might feel daunting. Where do you think administrators can start when they look at some of these statistics?
One of the things that we heard over and over again was teachers didn't have enough time to just think, like planning time. So structuring the day such that teachers have more planning time and an ability to just kind of catch their breaths is a big one. Another thing, people forget a lot of times how isolating it is to be a teacher. You're like this one person in a classroom with all these kids, and like even to take a bathroom break is kind of a stressful thing because you got to find somebody to mind your class while you do that. And I think there's an opportunity here to think about how we can bring in different types of supports, whether those are classroom aides or do we have like different types of time blocks for teachers so that they've got some flexibility in their days. Also, teachers, like they have doctor's appointments. They have like to get their car registered and they have all these things that have to also be done during the day like any normal person at a normal job, but they can't be in front of their computer all day long because they're in front of a classroom. So even responding to emails is difficult and making their appointments. So I would say be flexible. Be flexible. There are a lot of school districts that are rethinking like the length of the school week. Charter schools are doing this as well, the length of the school day, being flexible. I've seen some really cool things happening with some teachers that are looking at how to use Title I funding such that where you've got high concentrations of poverty, you can actually get additional specialists in that classroom. So you might have like maybe 3 adults in a classroom with 30 kids as opposed to just 1. And that allows them to be able to take a breath and rotate responsibilities amongst each other.
Very cool. Yeah, opens up all sorts of new, interesting models when you don't have some of those traditional constraints. Yeah, really interesting. All right, so just to recap, this was our kind of top 5 takeaways from the report, but the full report, Listen to Your Teacher, is available on the Alliance website. Is that right, Debbie? Where should people go if they want to read the full report, digest it for themselves over a morning cup of coffee?
Well, you should go right to publiccharters.org and you'll find it right on our homepage under publications.
Love it. Fantastic. We will also link to it in the show notes, but we are going to take you to publiccharters.org, so you can also just go directly there and save yourself the time. If someone is listening to this and they're a charter school leader and they are interested in getting some additional support around how to implement solutions based on some of this data, does the Alliance have resources? Any recommendations for who to reach out to or where to begin that journey?
We do have resources. And so definitely go also to publiccharters.org and hit the contact us thing. We answer every query that comes in. And believe it or not, I answer a decent amount of them myself if they're related to me. Also, we have communities of practice where we have educator communities that are around certain areas of focus, like there's a trauma-informed educators community of practice, and this really relates to a lot of the things we were talking about with disciplinary issues or some of the challenges we saw coming out of the pandemic. So that's an awesome one. We have an early childhood community of practice. We have a community of practice that's just for folks who have access funding from the charter schools program so that they can build a community there as well. So we're all about that and would love for folks to be in touch with us.
Fantastic. Well, certainly this is a national issue. And so the more that we can share best practices, the better. And the whole community will benefit from it. So the other thing I'll note is if you're a charter school and you've found some really interesting ways to address some of the things that we've talked about, reach out to Debbie and the Alliance, share what you all are doing.
Yes, teach us your ways.
That's right. Come be a guest speaker at one of the communities of practice, and we'll amplify your voice. You're welcome to come on this podcast and share what you're up to, and we'd be happy to have you. So with that, Debbie, thanks so much for doing this. This was really fun, and I think these five takeaways were great. Awesome.
All right.
Alrighty.
Thanks
Take
for
care.
listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@byq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.